Welcome to another edition of Thesis Theater. I'm Kris Swank. I'm the preceptor of these two wonderful graduated Signum students. We've got Franny Moore-Kyle and John Costello. And we're going to be talking with both of them about the theses that they just recently completed. Let me tell you a little bit about both of them. Franny's originally from Southern California, and she's lived in Central Arkansas now for more than 25 years. She married her high school sweetheart, and all three of her children are fully grown. She currently has 8 cat children and 18 chicken children. Those are your pet babies. And BA from California State University, Fullerton in history and English. She started Signum back in the spring of 2012 with Dr. Sturgis's Harry Potter class. Wow, that's right back at the beginning. And she's been reading science fiction and fantasy since she was about 12. She's been active in conventions, filk, singing, and fan fiction in several fandoms. She also knits, crochets, cross stitches, needlepoints, and any other crafty thing that makes her say, look, shiny. Welcome, Franny.
Thank you.
John Costello began his career as a naval architect, marine engineer, and upon graduation from the Webb Institute of Naval Architecture in 1989. After working as a naval architect for 6 years, while also performing IT systems management, he went to work as a sales manager and later a marketing manager in the aerospace industry. Upon graduation from the University of Maryland at Baltimore School of Law in 1999, John moved on to a corporate counsel role, supporting businesses in aerospace and defense industry. John passed the patent bar in 2009 and has been working for 10 years as the managing counsel for intellectual property and technology for Laureate Education, a company which owns and manages a worldwide network of over 60 universities. He currently lives on the eastern shore of Maryland with his long-suffering wife, 3 boys, aged 10 to 15, and 2 dog babies and 2 cat babies. Your pet children. All family members enjoy sailing, fishing, reading, and some enjoy riding motorcycles, while others are dead set against riding of said motorcycles. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
So tonight we're going to talk first to John and then to Franny, and then we'll have them both on the screen together. I do have the questions box available, and you can type your questions in at any time, and I'll try to check that from time to time and pass along your questions to the candidates. I'm Kris Swank. I started Signum back at the beginning as well, and I've been in many classes with these guys, and I was their thesis director and proud of it. We had a really good time. So let's talk a little bit about what we did. John, why don't you introduce what your thesis topic was and why you chose that?
Certainly. So I chose politics and steampunk literature, and I would say I came into it very slowly in terms of developing the overall topic itself. I love steampunk. Actually, I love any type of reading. I'll read anything, but particularly enjoy the fantasy, science fiction, horror, and steampunk itself seemed to be it's a relatively new genre. So quite honestly, how wrong could I be in my thesis by taking positions on almost anything? It seemed to be a good way to go. But seriously, I really just love and some people consider it an aesthetic. I love the steampunk aesthetic. As sort of a hobby over the last 30 years or so, I've been paying attention to politics, economics, and history, and reading, as much as I could on the subject. And so I tried to marry that hobby with my thesis topic. So eventually came to politics in steampunk literature, and that sort of flowered out and developed from there too, in a couple different directions.
So if somebody wasn't familiar with the steampunk genre, how would you define that for them or explain to them in a few sentences what steampunk aesthetic is?
Sure. So it's a version of alt history in which that posits the idea that in Victorian England, rather than society eventually industrializing and moving on to today's computer-based world, rather steam and steam power and steam mechanics took over and more or less achieves, through the use of steam engines, all the same sort of technology that we have today, but without all the modern day computer-oriented conveniences and things like that. So it's all history, and then it combines elements of fantasy, of course, of magic. There's alchemy and you know, a lot of cool robot, you know, steam-powered robot type contraptions and wild devices and things like that. And then, of course, it's an adventure. You know, it's fiction, and there's usually a crisis that must be solved by a hapless or honor-bound hero, and all of the activity that goes on in a steampunk novel usually is sort of glorifies, or original steampunk works glorified Victorian culture.
If I wanted to read just a few like of the best steampunk works, what would you recommend?
Okay, so I'd have to start. I mean, to me, cornerstone of everything I read, the best books for pure steampunk aesthetic and writing would probably be James Blaylock's Homunculus and Lord Kelvin's Machine. There have been more recent, you know, as steampunk has evolved, there have been some amazing novels written, and one of those ones I'd recommend highly is Dexter Palmer's The Dream of Perpetual Motion.
That one is good. Tim Fisher asks a question. Would you consider all Disney's 20,000 Leagues film with its Victorian Nautilus perhaps as early steampunk?
Yeah, unintentionally, yes. And I think that work, along with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, has ex post facto been pulled into the genre. And even before, so the three founders of the genre were Tim Powers, K.W. Jeter, and James Blaylock. But even before that, another set of works that totally typifies steampunk writing would have been Michael Moorcock's A Nomad of the Time Stream series. Again, pulled into after the fact, after the definition of what steampunk was came into being in the 80s.
So I guess we could also throw in there that great TV series, The Wild Wild West.
Absolutely.
That was always one of my favorites. And I see what you mean about the action in connection with all the great inventions, because you had the Jim West side and then you had the Artemis Gordon side, and they kind of are the two sides of steampunk, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And you know, I think that, again, it's a relatively new genre, but emanations of this aesthetic have been sort of surfacing over time to the point that now it has become its own thing.
So tell us about your research. You know, you said it was a fairly new genre. So has there been a lot of secondary literary criticism written about it, or how did you go about researching steampunk if it's so new?
Yeah, no. So it is relatively new. There's little scholarship on the subject. So when I decided I wanted to go the steampunk route, I looked around, and you know, the first thing I found was Mike Pershon, Professor Mike Pershon, who styles himself the steampunk scholar, and he had a tremendous amount of advice as to reading lists and steampunk information on his website. So that was one, you know, sort of, hey, let's just Google and see what we find. I then, you know, I went to Amazon, the source of pretty much everything I buy in the world, and Googled steampunk scholarship. Well, Amazon steampunk scholarship, and I found three collections of essays, all written relatively recently on steampunk, and so I picked those out as well. But then, you know, in order to understand politics in steampunk writing, I felt that I needed to understand the Victorian era itself, because it became important to me to know whether steampunk literature is reflective of actual Victorian culture. And so I chose two works there. Number one, in one of the forewords for one of K.W. Jeter's books, it was mentioned that that one of the inspirations, one of their main inspirations of those three original godfathers of steampunk writing, if you will, was a book by Henry Mayhew called London Labor and the London Poor. And this was a book written during the industrial rise of during the Victorian era. Henry Mayhew was a sort of a failed newspaperman who went out and decided to write the definitive book on the capitalist class that was emerging, the poor capitalist class that was emerging in London and benefiting from the industrialization as well as, suffering from it. And this was an unbelievable source that just talked about every little detail down to the penny of if you were a costermonger in the street selling some wares that you were building yourself and trying to eke by a living. Mayhew laid out the cost of each item that a costermonger would sell, and in the different jurisdictions in London, what price he or she could expect to get for that good. So that was unbelievable, and really soaked you in that culture. And then I also pulled a book just for the history, just a flat history book almost, called The Victorians. And this book chronicled the entire, London through the entire reign of Victoria.
So what did you discover? Is steampunk accurate, or how do they play with history?
Well, it's funny to say that you want an alt history genre to be accurate to history, but of course, being type A, I probably do to a certain extent. And to me, it was important to find out, So as I read these various steampunk works, it was clear that they sort of fit into three different chronological categories. The first being the early works of steampunk by those three authors. You certainly could take, again, War of the Worlds, etc. And those works really did, they portrayed the Victorian culture very accurately. Admitting the warts and all, yes, there was racism, yes, there was sexism, but hey, there were some good things too, and we're writing an adventure in this world, and so that was interesting. The second wave of steampunk literature has obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but as you would expect, expanded beyond that original template and moved steampunk stories out of Victorian culture into different time periods, the future, into different locations, Seattle, Washington, into entirely non-existent worlds, and sort of taken elements of the steampunk aesthetic and replaced it with other elements. And these works tend to be more thoughtful, perhaps, maybe less fun to read, and tend to portray a political agenda that the authors are trying to present more so than the original works, and in some ways have sort of taken a different or very derogatory view of Victorian culture, although not all of them. Some have been very complimentary.
So that's group one, the original group, and then the social commentators. And you said there was three groups that you could divide.
So I probably misspoke there. So in my paper, I termed them waves. I think probably with a little bit of help from my preceptor, but being that as it may, first wave steampunk was very true to Victorian culture. Second wave is different in the ways I described it. And then third wave, I went on to speculate what third wave might look like. And I'm basing my opinions on what third wave might look like on the recent, those three novels, those three collections of essays, critical analysis of steampunk writing, and quite frankly, what the critics are directing steampunk authors to write. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see if they go that way. You mentioned Professor Mike Persia, and one of the fantastic things about Signum is that we have no boundaries. We will ask anybody to come be a part of Signum, and just off the cuff, we decided to approach him and see if he would be your second reader, and he said yes. How great was that?
Oh, that was fantastic. I mean, I don't want to say, I get a little bit of celebrity star, jitters or anything like that. But, when the first thing that pops up is Professor Pershon's website when you begin your research, and then Professor Pershon is reading your thesis and commenting on it, it's special.
Yeah, it was really neat, and I really enjoyed working with him. He's from Canada and does quite a bit of this. I think he's got a book coming out in the not too distant future based on his dissertation, so anybody can read that coming up. What is the most unexpected thing that you found along the way?
So I would say the most unexpected thing I found was the lack of diversity of thought in the critical analysis of steampunk literature that I read, and it was largely an echo chamber, and it was kind of disappointing. There aren't many opposing viewpoints in these essays, and they were of a type that steampunk literature should be used to vilify and crush and destroy Victorian society. And I think, just on a personal level, I think that any society can be criticized in multitudes of ways, and every society has positives and negatives. But to call for the universal condemnation of Victorian society is a little bit ridiculous when it really contributed so much good to our world. And then I'd say even the more shocking thing for me was to find out that a lot of these scholars are advocating a Marxist, philosophy, which, and pushing that philosophy and trying to show how steampunk can be used to further Marxist philosophy. And I just think that in any chain of logic, when you work out your chain of logic and you come to a conclusion, and your conclusion is something nutty like an ideology that led to the deaths of 80 million people in a century is a good thing, neo-Marxism. I think there's something flawed in your chain of logic, or you might be a little nuts. So I read these essays, and I was kind of appalled.
Do you think that these social commentators are using Victorian England as a stand-in for 21st century America in that way? That maybe they're actually critiquing the society?
Yeah, in many ways, absolutely. And as you know, the industrialization that took place in England damaged the environment. And of course, today that is a huge issue. And we have people on all sides of the fence. We have real damage to the environment, and then we have maybe not real damage to the environment, but things that are portrayed as such. As always, there's two sides to every, as one thing you learn as a lawyer, two sides to every argument. And but yes, in these essays, there were absolute parallels drawn between the industrialization then and the computer age now. Yeah.
Well, if anybody has any questions for John, now is the time to type those in, as I'm going to wrap up with him and move on to Franny in just a second here. Any ideas of what you're going to do next? Are you excited about research now and continue to do it, or this is kind of a final act for?
Oh, sorry. As you can tell, my career, I've been thrown out of almost every reasonable career and industry over the course of time, and I have jumped from one discipline to another, and I'm now looking for some focus in my life. And the thing I'd like to jump again, and I really would like to write a book. And Mythgard has been invaluable in the education I've gotten here, in learning what you need to learn to become a writer.
Oh, that's awesome. Kate Neville has a question for you. Did you just look at literature, or did you also look at any films?
No, I excluded films. I read the books, and I have a very, again, type A way of doing that. I'll take hundreds of notes and citations for every book I read to be used later. And I found that just writing about the books, I ended up with like, I'm sorry, Kris, again, but it was something like a 50-page paper that I took. You know, my first draft was completely scatterbrained insane. So I just didn't have the time to go for the movies and music and everything else.
Well, hold on to that idea about the first draft being scatterbrained, because when we get you in conversation with Franny, I think that's something we all three have in common, because I've been through this process not too distant past as well, and we can talk about that. But for now, I'm going to take you off the hot seat. You can play with your cat there, wants to get in on the action. And and now I'm going to talk to Franny Moore Kyle, who did her research. I'm just basically going to say on Immortals, but you can tell us a little bit more detail what your thesis topic was.
Well, we call them Immortals, but they're not technically immortal. They're not. None of the characters I looked into were gods or totally immortal, but they were very long lived. And this is what I was interested in: is how a character responds to the change in culture and people and technology over a vast lifetime. I looked at 3 different series of books or texts. The first one was a series of 5 novels by Robert Heinlein that feature Lazarus Long and his extended family and their very long lives. The second was a series of novels that is still being written by Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough featuring a vampire character, the Count of Saint-Germain. But they're not vampire stories. They're actually historical horror stories. His vampirism isn't the horror. It's what actually happened in the world at that time. That's the horror. That's the antagonist in each story. I haven't read them all. There's more than 25 books, and she's still writing. And then the third was a television series. The Highlander, the series, which of course was based on the film with Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery, but the TV show starred, oh boy, talk about, starred other people, and I cannot for the life of me remember his name right now. But Duncan MacLeod, the Klein Bottle, there can be only
Adrian
one.
Paul.
Adrian Paul, of course. I don't know why that fell off my tongue. And it involved his life for several years with various other immortals as well as with various mortals. So it really gave some insights into how he dealt with these things. And of course, all the flashbacks, and we see his life from his original birth to the time the series starts, which is 1990. It covers from 1992 to 1999. And it was in real time then. So what was current then was current. I mean, not very good. Some cell phones, but not much. Not nearly as much cell phone or computer technology as we have now, but some. But those 3, even though they're not, as I said, they're not technically immortal. They have extended lives. Now, I chose to ignore other vampire stories. Well, the elves of Tolkien I didn't cover because they're not the other. In fact, they're the firstborn in Tolkien's legendarium. They're if anything, the men is the other in Tolkien, if you're focusing on elves. But then other vampire stories, the earlier ones are the vampire is the antagonist, and it's more focused on how to kill them, how to find them and how to kill them rather than on how they live. And then the current wave of vampire stories are mostly romance stories, and the fact that one of the characters is a vampire isn't at all an issue. It's just, he might as well be lactose intolerant, you know, other than he drinks blood. You know, one of the, it's just not that, that's not the issue. You know, so I stuck with these three series of texts, and really got a wide sampling of ideas of how characters deal with changing times.
All right. So I got a message that your camera is going in and out, Franny, but I don't think there's anything we can do about that.
I think it just went out. Yeah.
Yeah, but
It
I
went
can
out
see
and
you.
came back.
Yeah, I can see you now.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick one of the Chelsea Quinn Yarborough books for someone to start with.
Oh, well, I started when when there was only one. Hotel Transylvania was first published in 1978. And I had read it when I was fortunate enough to meet Miss Yarborough. And we've not maintained a friendship, but we've kept in touch on and off through conventions and conferences. And she was kind enough to answer some questions for me in my research. So I would, I think reading them in publication order, it's probably better because her writing style is more, you know, is more of a flow rather than trying to follow the characters in chronological order, because you've got 5,000 chronology to deal with him, and or 4,000, 4 to 5,000 years worth of chronology with him, and she's written things from ancient up to current day.
So
San
publication
Francisco.
order is
So
good as anything.
Publication order, I think, is probably the best to. It originally started out as a 5-book series, was what she was contracted for.
Wow. There's a animated film called Hotel Transylvania or something like that. Is there any?
Yes, and it has nothing to do with Saint-Germain. It's
And
an animated series.
Heinlein's is a bit more. It's not what we really consider a series, is it? It's
Well,
more
it starts off that just he's a character. Yes, they're more related books, although the last 3 come one right after the other. I think it's hard to tell when they have such extended lives and they're flitting around the cosmos at relativistic speeds, and they can pick and choose what era and what timeline they come out in when they come out of their relativistic stuff. It's I'm not a physicist. I only know some, but it's it gets a little it gets a little complicated sometimes with the science. Although they started out, Lazarus Long first appears in Methuselah's Children, which was originally serialized in Analog or Astounding Stories. I think that was before it became Analog, in 1948. And then he did not revisit the character until 1978, I think, when he wrote, sometime in the 70s when he wrote Time Enough for Love. And that brought back Lazarus Long, and also took him back to his own childhood, to revisit his own childhood in Lazarus went back to his own childhood in Missouri in 1916. I read a biography of Heinlein as part of this, and it was interesting to see how much Lazarus Long's early life mirrors Heinlein's early life. And in truth, I think I've found that Lazarus Long is certainly Heinlein's alter ego in many ways.
That's really interesting. Kate seconds your suggestion to read the Chelsea Quinn Yarborough in publication order. So what was the most important thing or the most interesting thing that you learned from this research? Are there any similarities between these works? Any kind of ties you can draw between them?
Yes, and this surprised me. I did not expect to find this, but the single most important goal or motivation for all of these characters was building a family, having people around them that they cared about, that whether it's blood, actual biological family, or just a collection of people, like-minded people, or a combination of both. Vampire with Yarbrough's, there actually is a blood relationship, since he makes new vampires with blood, but he also brings people, makes another class of immortal, the ghouls that serve as the daytime assistants basically for the vampires. They do all the things that vampires can't do, but they are also immortal. And this is a technique he learns in ancient Egypt. Duncan MacLeod, even in the very first episode of the season, of season 1, you do meet Connor MacLeod. Christopher Lambert came back and reprised the role, and they're as cousins. They think of themselves as cousins, but he's always got an ersatz family running. He takes in the young potential immortal Richie, and with he and his girlfriend, and then after the girlfriend is killed, it becomes Amanda. And there's a couple of episodes where they do touch on the fact that immortals can't have children, and gee, this will be the only type of family I'll ever have, kind of wistfulness, and several flashbacks where Duncan has put together a family, or taken in a widow and children to take it to raise as his own, because he can never have his own children. And I think this family that he builds around himself is the constant through the series, and in some of whom go back into his earlier life.
You also had the same problem John did of not having an abundance of secondary research to draw on. So how did you do with that? How did you manage that?
Well, I found a couple of book reviews of Miss Yarbrough's books, and of course I mentioned I was able to ask her some questions. The Highlander, there's a lot of fan fiction out there, but there's also a book that is an authorized tell-all type of thing, and it's all of the Highlander iterations, and it does a episode by episode guide, interviews with the cast and crew, with the writers, talking about what they were what they meant, what they were doing in certain areas, and that was although it wasn't an academic work, it was very helpful in understanding the roots of the stories, and what they were trying to, because some of them were fluff, yes, some of them were very were trying to say things, definitely, just like like a lot of TV shows that have any kind of social responsibility, try to, but still being entertaining.
Yeah, I know they have quite a big
the Heinlein was different. The Heinlein was different because there is. I had read the 2-volume authorized biography, and there's also a critical analysis that goes story by story, book by book, through his entire career, and that was very helpful, putting things in its place and tying the stories in with what was happening in his own life, which have, of course, he says he wrote his first story so he could pay off a mortgage, and he was very definitely a proponent of you write for money, and that's the only way you write. He did not appreciate criticism. I'm not meaning like bad reviews. I'm thinking of, he didn't like academics looking into what he really meant, or what this really means in context. Because he didn't consciously put that kind of thing into his stories. In fact, in one of the last books, he recommends that literary critics and academics be put in a Klein bottle, which means that the exit is the entrance. It's kind of, it's one of those strange mathematical things where you can't get out and they'll never bother you again.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
But he did leave his papers to a university, so
I don't know too many authors who really enjoy what we academics are doing to their works. It's not a pleasant process. It's kind of like picking apart, somebody's baby. They spend a lot of time on. Okay, any questions for Franny? Now is the time to type. And I have one that popped in. I understand your reasoning behind excluding Tolkienish elves, but did you look at any of his letters or histories of Middle-earth material on immortality? Any of his theories of immortality or ideas
No,
about immortality?
I sort of just walled off Tolkien. It's because I think if I started to go down that road, I would never have been able to keep it at a reasonable.
Yeah.
I had to make some restrictions, and that was one of the ones I made.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I did read actually, which turned out to be a philosophy book on immortality in Western literature, and it was because it was it covered the classical literature. It delved very much in seeing immortality as a Christian concept, and only looking at that as that the only immortality you should strive for is of your soul. And one of the things I wanted to do is see more of because all of these works were done in what is not unreligious, but really a post-Christian, where people are not as wholeheartedly religious as they were in past centuries. I really didn't want to look at the religious concepts, and none of these works really go into religion, although they have church, other than Duncan MacLeod not being able to fight on holy ground, but it's anybody's holy ground, not just Christian holy ground. Saint-Germain, of course, pays lip service to the church when he's in a church-oriented area, and when he's been in other countries, he does what he has to blend in and to look good. Heinlein, the only time he really got into the idea of religion even was with Stranger in a Strange Land, and that's just very peripheral to the Immortals, in that characters from Stranger show up at the end of the Lazarus Long cycle.
Oh, that's interesting.
All of his characters show up at the end of the Lazarus Long cycle.
All right, so I have a big black box where John used to be. I don't know if you shut your webcam off or if that's a function of your internet service, but are you still there, John? Can you talk and can we hear you?
I am.
Yay.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll pop back in. It's telling me that the camera's on. So.
Yeah, I show that the camera's on as well. So I'm not quite sure what's up there. Hopefully you'll pop back in. But so let's talk a little bit amongst ourselves, and if the audience has got any insight on this as well, about the whole thesis process. John, you talked about how your first draft was, I think it was close to 1,000 pages. I remember reading. Yeah.
And every time it comes up, I will apologize again.
No. What's hilarious is that this happens to everybody, and mine was as well. Franny, how long was your first draft?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
I'm
but
not a linear writer, so it's hard to really say.
yeah,
I write batches and then put them get together like a jigsaw puzzle. So it's hard to say what it could have been, how long it could have been.
right. Uh-oh.
But if I'd been more expounded more about the storylines of each of these characters and all, I could have gone on for pages and pages.
Sure, sure. So John, how did it how was your writing process and end up with all those pages?
Yeah, I mean, it was
There you
I
are.
mean, 2 notebooks full of notes with page numbers and quotations, and then I culled through all those to pick out and then put all the right quotes in the right places to support the right sections of the thing. Then I realized I had to cut the number of quotes by about 80%, and
Right.
just it forces you to distill out what's really important. I don't need to prove the same point with 27 different book citations. I could probably do it with 2, and then you realize, as you go through the process, if you were to do it with 27, you'd be boring your readers to death. So, I think if I ever turn this into a proper scholarly paper that I could publish, it would be very long, but at least the whole length would be all the millions of citations I have. I would definitely compact the actual writing.
I think my first draft, just the literature review, was like 30 pages, and my thesis supervisor was Verlyn Flieger, and she's just like, no, 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 no. It's not a paper of other people's ideas. It's supposed to be a paper of your ideas. So you have to go back and cut that. But then even when I turned my thesis into an academic article, I had to cut more because 30 pages is too long, for that. So there's still more paring down to do. Can look forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, you really, okay, just to bring it around to our favorite topic, when I first watched the Lord of the Rings movies, I think the theatrical version doesn't have that. I think this is true, and I know however many people on the list will tell me I'm wrong here, but the scene where the orcs get eaten by the forest and the trees are swaying, and it wasn't in the original theatrical version. And I remember learning that after I'd seen the extended version. I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would you cut? And I had a film student explain to me how critical every second of every movie is, and how hard it is to fill in, and decide what to leave on the cutting room floor. So in some ways, we have to be that way with the writing, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you guys learn about the writing process going through the thesis process that you might not have known, I guess, on the shorter papers during the Signum? Like any advice you can give to people approaching coming into the thesis? Franny?
It's that you don't have to cite everybody that you've read. I read a lot of things that that were important to my understanding of it all, but that never made it into a citation, but just basically primed the pump for me thinking about these things. So, one of those was a book on essays called Immortal Engines, that was the papers from a conference on immortality in science fiction that was held about the turn of the century, and
20th to 21st.
So it was yes, the most recent turn of the century.
Yeah.
And it went everything from, they had it had looked into the actual science behind various forms of immortality, and it cited texts from hundreds of science fiction texts that I've read, and most of which I've at least read or looked at, but I've been reading science fiction a long time. But it was a lot of what I absorbed from that didn't make it into the paper.
Any advice, John, or anything that you learned about the writing process?
I'm always fascinated by the transition from the thoughts in the head down to the paper. One of the reasons I love Stephen King as a writer is I always say he writes the way people think. Like the conversation that might go on in my head, he is able to lay out so eloquently on paper. And I think if there's any bit of advice, I would say if you're struggling, just try to put the words onto the paper exactly the way you're thinking them. You can always go back later and tie them together in a better fashion, but those thoughts that are going on in your head are usually word for word a really good depiction of the point you're trying to make. So I try to short circuit what's in my head and get it right to the paper, and then so much easier to go back after the fact and edit it down.
That's excellent. The Signum thesis process is 2 semesters, and the idea is the first semester you get to focus on reading all sorts of things, and then the second semester you get to focus on writing your thesis. How did that work out for you guys?
I wish
Franny?
I had started writing. I wish I had started writing while I was reading.
Oh, okay.
I would have been able to focus. I think I would have been able to find that point of focus earlier than it did, because that was a big problem of mine, is really narrowing my ideas into a usable, doable.
Do you mean something like journaling, maybe your ideas as you're reading?
Yes. But see, with my process, I would have been, if I'd been journaling, and whole paragraphs of that would have ended up in the, I would have been pulling then from all of that for the final, or at least in my first draft.
Yeah. How about you, John? How'd that 2-semester series work out?
It worked fine for me. I think I needed to really read everything before I started. I honestly, I didn't have the structure of the final paper, and I think I changed the focus based on a lot of the reading that I did. So for me, it worked out okay.
But that's kind of nice. I mean, going in with this idea that you think you're going to go this direction, and then being open to going another direction where the research leads you is exactly what we're hoping, students will do, because that's where the new ideas come from. So that's pretty cool. Questions, if you want to type those in now. We've got a few more minutes that we're going to be carrying on, so we'll give you some time to type. I had a question on the tip of my tongue, and then it just went right out the door. So anything that you guys want to talk about with your thesis or the thesis process?
Well, I mean, I see Todd Heidenrich is out there, so I just wanted to talk about how the Caps knocked the Penguins out of this series.
Thanks for that, for your sports ball reference.
No problem.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll type something in a second, and hopefully I can read it on live webcam.
He might be right now. You never know.
Yeah. Oh, Kate says boo.
No, I'd like to, I think one thing, you asked me to share a reading list.
Oh, yeah.
And
uh-oh, you froze up a little bit. Oh no, I think the computer gods are getting back at him for that sports ball reference. So while we're waiting for John to come back, Franny, anything that you have to say about your readings or your process?
There was a lot more I could have read if I'd had the time. I would have brought in more, read more of the Saint-Germain books, rather, read some of the ones I hadn't read before, instead of just reviewing ones that I already knew fairly well. I don't think anything got read less than twice anyway. So, but,
yeah, that's the thing. Reading something.
Yeah, more time. That first, yeah, you almost need a third semester before the a pre-semester, a zero semester to just immerse yourself.
Yeah. Either having that summer off or having a really nice long winter holiday to do that. I understand. Yeah, I had a whole reading list for what I'm doing now, and I do find myself going back and reading them multiple times, which is something that we're not used to, and I actually resist very much, but I'm glad every time I do it.
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't know what happened with John. He's offline.
Well, I think it's been raining where he is, so
yeah, he said
there's
that.
a storm. He might have been knocked off.
He said that was the case. So that's too bad. And Todd did respond, but I'm not going to read that until I can read it to John.
Oh.
So what's next for Franny now that your Signum degree is wrapped up?
I don't know. If I were 20 years younger, I'd probably go for a PhD. But
well, you can always come back to Signum and start to learn languages.
Well, that's what I'm thinking on that. I've been cross stitching for the last several months, working on very intricate, large projects that I hadn't been able to do for a long time. And then just really decompressing. It's really been several months that I needed to decompress because I've been, I've had the occasional semester off, but I've been going to school long. That's a pretty hefty chunk of time that I immersed myself in Signum. But I'll be at MythMoot.
Oh, good. That was a question.
And I really enjoy going to conferences, whether I present or not.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. John has been to some past MythMoots. I'm not sure if he's coming to this one. But yeah, that'll be good to have you there. And Todd says he's always impressed with anyone who makes it through the whole process. And I have to say, yeah, it's taking the classes for Signum is really fun. And you get into that thesis process, and it's just like, what have I gotten myself into? And I needed at least 6 months to decompress after that.
Well, the course that they just started last year, the research, the theory and research class was really quite helpful. I do wish I had the opportunity to take it at the beginning of, which is what they're recommending now, that you take it at the beginning of your career. But it's the way they've got it structured. You can use that really to bring yourself up to your thesis proposal, to get yourself ready for your thesis proposal.
Yeah, when we went through Signum, they didn't have that. There he is. He's back. Yay.
As expected, it was a hijacked internet by child with video game.
Aha.
Well, this is being recorded, so you can taunt them with that
sometimes.
for many, many years after. Okay, so here are some comments from Todd. Haha, John, at least I'll still have the pleasure of seeing Fleury win another Stanley Cup. And one thing I've discovered is that I enjoy the material and the lectures and discussions, but I absolutely hate the writing process, and it's really hard. Yes, Todd, it's really hard, the writing process, and this is like 6 months with just you and the writing process. How was it? Because in the other Signum classes, you have a whole cadre of people that you're in contact with every week, and suddenly you get thrown into this thesis process, and it's just you and the books and your thoughts.
Yes.
How was that?
It is harder to, without having several people to bounce ideas off of, or to hear their ideas as they bounce them off you. that the discussion sessions were wonderful about to help, it helps to my writing in the class, in the various classes. But we don't have that with this, and we had a lot of time together, yes, but it's still not quite the same.
Right. How about for you, John?
I'll tell you what's hard.
Oh, sorry, hang on for a second, Franny.
I was going to tell you what's hard is pushing send on that first paper 35 years after your last paper.
Yeah.
That's hard. That was hard. From my last academic paper was 1975, and that first paper in 2012 was just hitting send was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I did it.
You did it, and you got all the way through.
I did
That's
it.
great.
And I got all the way through.
That's great. So how was that echo chamber for you, John, where it's just you and your thoughts in the books for 6 months?
Well, no, I mean, the good thing about the process, the good thing about the whole thesis is that it forces you to take an opinion, to take a position, have an opinion, formulate a theory, and it can be uncomfortable. One thing I was constantly worried that I was going to be taking a position that has easily been contradicted by every scholar in the field, and I put something together that looked brilliant in my mind, and then oh yeah, no, John, we invented the wheel already. That's great, but once you've done that, the boost to your confidence is fantastic, and I think it's a necessary element of I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know I had to do a thesis to graduate, because I have a tendency not to look too far down the path, because I might go insane like an H.P. Lovecraft character. And so when he was like, I have to write a thesis, are you kidding me? I'm glad I had to do it. It was good.
That's great. Kate has also been through this and finished up, and she says she misses the group talk as well, and she's been precepting and auditing a couple of times, just to get back into that. And Harry Potter was her first class as well. So you and Kate started at the same time, Franny, and she remembers the terror of submitting her first paper.
Yes.
Yeah, but you did great, Kate. I remember.
Yes.
I remember your paper on Luthien Tenuvio. We have 1 minute left, so any last departing words, and then after this, you guys get a diploma, and you're all done.
Yeah.
Words from us?
Yeah.
I'll let Franny go first.
Oh, well, it's hard work. It's sometimes terrifying, but all in the end, it's a wonderful sense of accomplishment. And I wouldn't not do it again. I wouldn't have not done it for everything. I'm so glad that I started with Sigmund and then I followed through. I'm really very I won't say pleased with myself, but I'm very happy that I took this challenge on myself and completed it.
And John.
I mean, I'd say to me, life has always been a series of phases, and there was my undergrad phase, there was high school phase, and usually these phases correspond somehow to education. This is always going to be my most fond, if closest to my most fond, or if not my most fond educational experience these last few years at Signum/Mythgard. And I hope to stay involved with the Institute. It's just been fantastic.
Oh, that's great. That's great hearing from both of you. You guys were my first thesis students, so you'll always have a very soft spot in my heart, and I'm just super proud of both of you.
Thank you for getting us through this.
Thank you. Oh, yes, you were invaluable.
It was a lot of fun.
I'd also like to thank Chris Larson, who was my second reader.
Yeah, the wonderful Christine Larson.
I've known her, a wonderful Dr. Christine Larson, whom I met on a Yahoo groups Highlander fan fiction site long, long ago. We were both using different names at the time, but she was a wonderful help too. And not just in her second reading, but just in her support of me all these years that since I've been back at Sigmund.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. Larson, you're phenomenal. And both of you guys are phenomenal too. It's time to wrap it up, but I want to thank the audience for being here live. And if you're watching this recorded, thank you for taking the time to watch this. And hopefully someday it'll be you sitting here in the Signum Thesis Theater. Thank you to Franny Moore-Kyle and John Costello. You guys are officially done with your degree at Signum. Congratulations.
Thank you, Kris. Could not have done it without you.
All right. Good night and good journeys.
Thank you.
Thank you.